Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm joined today, as always, by Dr. Jason Martin. He's a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon. I did not say welcome, everyone, to Beauty and the Surgeon podcast. I'm Amy. There we go. That's the way to start it. My very inquisitive co-host, Dr. Martin. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
I mean, it's 2025.
I didn't know what podcast we were doing for a while there.
Who knew?
Maybe we're doing a new one.
I do sometimes get confused because while I do not have another podcast, I do have a vlog, and occasionally I'll intro my vlog the way I intro the podcast and vice versa. It's like answering when we used to have home phones and you would say your work answer.
Right,
like, good afternoon, Dr. Martin's office. This is Amy. And like people are like, what?
Yes.
So Dr. Martin, this is research we're into 8.0.
Yeah, it's always our favorite. I'm not sure about the listeners, but
otherwise known as even more research we're into.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And behind the scenes, you and I like to throw things back and forth to each other and talk about this kind of stuff. So why not talk about it on the episode?
Well, there's a lot of cool research out there, and my study really utilizes some of the more advanced, like computer-based learning things that are out there. And I think that's really what's going to change a lot of research in general for medicine.
I agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
AI is going to be huge for a lot of things. And my study actually is more of a summation of the studies that are out there. But it does relate to technology and where things are going in terms of peptides and the way you construct those. And that is AI driven.
Don't talk too much because you're first. So
Okay.
Let's just start with you so you don't trump all over your own study.
Yeah, I love it.
So
Okay.
Dr. Martin's study is glucagon-like peptide 1 class drugs show clear protective effects in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease clinical trials. A revolution in the making?
Maybe.
And this is from Neuropharmacology, August 2024.
Right.
So last year.
This was written, it was kind of a summation of all the studies that are out there, which is why I really like that. So in reality, it was written by Holscher, who's a neuroscientist from Germany. And I looked at his bio and man, this guy is super acclaimed. Not many people make me feel pretty bad about myself. I mean, this guy, he has appointments at multiple universities. One of them is in China. He has a startup company that's working with GLP-1s and these neurodegenerative diseases. So I was very much impressed. So, Amy, let's start real quick, just background, because we see it in the news all the time. What do GLP-1s do from your standpoint at a basic level?
They are glucagon-like peptides, so they are mimicking the glucagon peptide in the body. So they do several things. They slow gastric emptying, which decreases appetite. They're also helpful for balancing blood sugars for that same reason. They're slowing down how quickly food is getting into your system.
Right. They stimulate insulin secretion from the pancreas. That's another way that it works. And actually, because it's like glucagon, it decreases the effect of glucagon. Glucagon is like the opposite of insulin. Glucagon causes the liver to release blood or glucose. Okay. So it would raise your blood glucose levels. And that's by breaking down glycogen or gluconeogenesis also. So it works to lower your blood sugar levels. When these were created, did you know that they were created in the early 2000s?
Yes.
Okay.
The drugs have been on the market. These GLP-1s have been on the market for a number of years.
Yeah.
They were just unstable. And I think with a lot of peptides, that's what the issue is. They have to be stored a certain way. A lot of them were very short acting.
Right.
So they were having to be injected at a specific time,
Right.
directly before meals. Like they were a little more labor intensive for someone to use for something like managing diabetes. Whereas these newer, go ahead.
No, I love you. I mean, this is exactly what I wanted to say. The newer ones last longer.
Correct.
And so they're readjusting the peptides. So Mounjaro is the most recent one. That was 2022. And they're going to come out with new ones that the peptides are adjusted. They're also going to come out with new ones because you're reaching the trademark level of it. So they're going to have to come out with new types so they can charge more, obviously. So everyone's heard about GLP-1s because it's in the news all the time, and all these, Elon Musk is taking GLP-1s to lose weight. Everyone's taking Ozempic or something like that. But so my interest is more about the other effects of GLP-1 drugs, which you don't always think about on the heart, on the kidney, and most importantly on the brain. I always go back to Parkinson's disease because it's in my family. Alzheimer's disease is in my wife's family. So that's where my headspace is. Me personally, I want to make sure that I keep my brain in tip-top shape. Amy, what is the favorite word that you've ever said about the brain?
I don't know.
What system do you love?
Oh, I love the lymphatic system. You said what word? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, the glymphatic
Yes.
system. Yes.
Glymphatic.
So I think about that all the time. She taught me about the glymphatic system, about how to keep your brain healthy. And there's so many ways. reducing stress, sleep, nutrition, keeping your brain stimulated, and making sure that you don't have behaviors that cause problems with your brain, like smoking and drinking and all that other kind of stuff.
Having unmitigated blood sugars.
And insulin and high blood sugars is one of them. So what is the...
Before we get into that,
Yeah.
so what are the current drug therapies for these conditions?
Yeah,
Perhaps maybe that's a good place to start, because what are actually the things that are being used to treat
I feel like
these?
you're looking at my notes.
I was not. I'm looking at my
Oh,
notes.
okay. That's pretty damn good. So if you're talking about Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, there's not much.
Right.
So the ones that are my interest, which we've talked about before, is Parkinson's disease. You get a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the brain in an area called the substantia nigra in certain areas of your brain. And that leads to the effects of Parkinson's disease. And then ultimately people get dementia. Alzheimer's disease, we're not totally sure what's happening there. Now I think they believe it's like a loss of energy in the cells, and you get this kind of cascading, worsening dementia. But that is the issue. There aren't really any medications for that. There aren't just treating the symptoms. They aren't making this better.
Right. I think, and that's a good example of that is the amyloid plaque theory. And several years ago, we brought that up in an episode, and you didn't believe me at the time when I said that these drugs did not show that they were actually effective. And yeah, they have not proven to be
believed you.
effective.
I was just testing you. I was just making sure that you...
Well, but that was the buzz around them, was that this was the solution, and it's found that it really isn't.
Right. And they came out with a medication recently, and it said it really offered really minimal change, maybe a little bit. Now, obviously, if you have Alzheimer's and you can get a 10% change, of course, you're going to take it.
Yeah.
And the reason is it's multifactorial for these diseases, meaning that it's from chronic inflammation. It's probably from loss of energy utilization in the brain, loss of synaptic activity, impaired autophagy, and impaired response to oxidative stress. I'm just saying everything that is occurring, and that's multifactorial. So how do you create a medication that solves that problem?
Right. I mean, the amyloid plaques are a good example of that.
Right.
Like, it didn't solve it, even though they're there. It's like cholesterol. Is it the reason, or is it the body's trying to make a solution by forming these things?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then this is what I find so fascinating. If you think about GLP-1s, we all think, Amy and I do, I know I do, maybe Amy is, a little smarter than me on these kind of things, where GLP-1s work on appetite. They work on gastric emptying. They work on the pancreas to increase insulin release. But actually, GLP-1s cross the blood-brain barrier in most cases and affect the brain, which is crazy. And you're seeing a lot of stuff come out now about GLP-1s and people with addiction. And so it's affecting the brain, actually in the hypothalamus and the brainstem, which I find fascinating.
And kind of scary.
Really crazy. And it also reduces inflammation in the brain, that's known. And it enhances reward regulation. That's where the kind of addiction part comes. So you'll see that people are on GLP-1s and struggle with addiction, have a higher incidence of recovery from that or control. So this drug itself is doing something that some of the other drugs do not do, for like metformin or for weight loss or whatever. It's also affecting a whole other area of your body, which I find absolutely fascinating. Okay.
So was there an actual study design here?
Yeah. So he looked at multiple studies, some of which he's doing. Okay. And the first one a group did was started in 2010. And they looked at people with Parkinson's disease that were 10 years progressed. And they judged them on, there's two different types of studies that you can utilize for both cognitive impairment and also movement disorders. So it's something that's accepted by people in this field of study in the neurosciences. I'm not going to get into that.
Is there a way, this is actually a good question, because we talk a lot in our research, we're into episodes about whether this is a human or an animal study, because so much of research is done on animals. Do they have an animal population that it has Parkinson's-like symptoms?
They
disease?
do. Yeah, they've done that. But these are actually phase 2 studies. Phase 2 looks at the safety of a drug. It's usually smaller studies. And a couple of these are now in phase 3 trials, which are large volume or large cohort trials.
In humans.
So, and it's the interesting thing about all this stuff is these are already approved in humans.
Correct.
So like they've already passed, that's what I find so fascinating. So you're like repurposing a drug.
Well, Cialis. Hello, Cialis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're repurposing the drugs and they're looking at it from a human standpoint. But at least the first study, which was a phase 2 trial, like, 60 people, 40 people, it's pretty small.
Who had 10 years of Parkinson's history.
Right.
Okay.
And they did, and this is per memory, but they did the study for like 12 months. They gave them the medication. It was one of the first GLP-1s. It was the ones that Amy was referring
like
to.
Like liraglutide.
Yeah, it was even before then. I forget the name, I can tell you, but it was short acting, kind of like what you're talking about.
Liraglutide is daily.
Yeah,
like it's a short acting.
It was even shorter than that. So it was one of the very first ones. And they saw a notable improvement in both cognitive impairment and movement disorders over the duration of the treatment. But this was what was crazy after that. Then they stopped it, and they showed extended benefit from this drug for months and months afterwards in comparison to the baseline. So that was the first indication, and especially this neuroscientist that I was talking about from the beginning. Then they went on and did a follow-up study on that because they didn't have a placebo group. They did the placebo group, and they saw the same effect. It was a little bit more diminished, but they theorized it was because the Parkinson's patients were only 6 years per diagnosis. So the amount of improvement you get when someone who's less compromised is maybe, it's not.
It's harder to.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Harder to quantify.
It's harder to compare, especially when you're further down the line. And then he went on to talk about more studies, and their studies with some of the newer drugs, both with Parkinson's, they saw the same effect. And then with Alzheimer's, they have a phase 3 study in Alzheimer's now where they're showing an improvement in cognitive impairment. I find that completely fascinating.
Yeah.
So one of the things you said, which I thought was really funny, it's like you are prescient. So the shorter half-life GLP-1s cross the blood-brain barrier better. And it must be the way the peptide is organized.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a more rapid onset.
Yeah. Whereas the more longer acting ones, the ones that last 100 hours, like the Manjaros of the world or whatever, don't really cross the blood-brain barrier as well, supposedly. So the idea that you would create a GLP-1 not for diabetes, because it doesn't really help if it only lasts for 1 to 2 hours, but you would take it for these neurodegenerative diseases, and then maybe daily shots.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with that would become that it's already challenging with some of these neurodegenerative conditions. Diet becomes an issue. This is something we talk a lot about in nutritional therapy.
So that was addressed. They've had multiple studies, and they've shown with these lower doses or the types of ones they were using, they didn't have a precipitous weight loss.
Good, because they weren't. I mean, that would be devastating in a disease that causes muscle wasting.
Especially in Alzheimer's, you can see that people become
deconditioned,
anorexic.
Well, Parkinson's too. They can, they don't want to eat. They become kind of petulant.
Well, I can tell you with my dad, it was hard to swallow. I mean, their actual muscle movements and coordination are difficult. They're choking hazards, especially with Alzheimer's too. So
Alzheimer's, they forget to eat, which is not a bad joke. That's real.
It's 100% real. So the weight loss is less of an issue. But this is what I found fascinating. So I'm going to go to this part. He kind of went and summarized exactly what the total effect of these things are. So if you look at GLP-1 agonist in neurodegenerative diseases, what the research shows is that it restores energy utilization in the brain, okay? And that's one of the main theories for Alzheimer's is the mitochondria become dysfunctional and the cells aren't making energy. So even though you have your substrates there, they're not functioning like normal. They don't literally, it's like you waking up in the morning hungover. Basically, that's where the whole, all the cells and the neurons are working in the brain.
Well, because the plaques start to block those connections. So your brain's having to rewire.
Right. They're talking about literally the energy production in the cells themselves. And the plaques may be a secondary effect of that.
Right.
It normalizes synaptic activity and gene expression, reduces chronic inflammation. All these diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's have a chronic inflammatory component. And a lot of those people
do all autoimmune conditions.
Right. Yeah. A lot of those people have disease issues that are inflammatory based, diabetes, right? Stuff like that. These things can lead or you can have a higher incidence of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. It promotes cell repair and it compensates for impaired insulin signaling, which I find fascinating because the GLP-1s act as a growth factor and resensitize insulin pathways. So it allows you to bring in the glucose to the cells so they can work normally.
Well, and there's a whole theory of Alzheimer's that it's like type 3 diabetes is what they call it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is all from insulin dysregulation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, if you think about what these drugs are really used for is type 2 diabetes where insulin is.
Well, but that's what they're used for now. When they were initially studied, they were initially studied for their neuroprotective benefits.
Yeah. Well,
before they were found to have these other side effects of being good at controlling appetite,
Right.
lowering blood sugar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was all around the same time, which I found fascinating. And so that's what the future holds. If you want to talk about where this is going to be applied practically, is in the future, you're probably going to have GLP-1s that are primarily made from a peptide standpoint, the structure of it, to cross the blood-brain barrier and to affect the brain. And that the data, at least in the phase 2 and phase 3 trials, shows notable improvement in cognition, which has never happened in Alzheimer's with the majority of things. Medications tested, and a notable improvement in movement disorders, which I've besides levodopa and the stuff that people normally take, I haven't seen.
Yeah, which have terrible
Parkinson's.
side effects.
Right.
Yeah.
So I find this really fascinating, and you'll see, I think this is going to be a big part of the future in these treatments of neurodegenerative diseases. Also, you're going to see more and more of these types of medication, maybe not GLP-1s.
But peptides, I think
peptides
being able to isolate and utilize them.
Right. They're basically growth factors. That's what they call them, that cross the blood-brain barrier that affect the brain. This is what we've never had before. And I'm assuming Amy's going to talk a little bit about AI, and that's where you see in these peptide designs, as the AI designs them and then test them in the AI system, which utilizes supercomputers, because the amount of combinations is insane. And actually this is getting way off into the forest, but there's something called a quantum computer that's now coming out. Google has one, IBM has one. And ask me how it works, I have no idea. I've read it like 4 times and I still don't understand. It's just very space age. Anyways, those are like infinitely faster than the best supercomputer. And once we're able
by billions fold, like it's not even numbers that the human brain can comprehend. A quantum computer, like
so the one that recently that that was like advertised or was in an article. Was it
advertised?
Yeah, whatever.
You cannot buy a quantum computer.
I don't know.
This is not on the back of a cereal box.
I always feel like when you
kids.
read it like in Medium or something that the company is just releasing this as a PR stunt. But you know what I'm saying? It's not part of a scientific article. Yeah. So there was an equation or some sort of computation that it did, and it would have taken the best supercomputer, that exists right now 35 years, and it took the quantum computer 3 seconds.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, that's the difference. So I don't even know what that ratio is.
Yeah, it messes with all internet security. Like once they're developed, that's what other countries developing them, and America know that it's because as soon as they nail that down, it's like there's no password, there's no security measure. They have to figure out a whole different way to secure data once they're out there. So it's kind of scary.
Isn't that what blockchain's supposed to stop, or is that even included?
I'm not sure totally, but yeah, I know that's one of the biggest concerns is just all over digital security will change fundamentally.
Security will change.
Security in general, yeah. But very cool technology.
Yeah, so it's insane. So if protein folding and
I was actually just going to bring that up.
And protein structures, Google has a whole subset in AI for this, and other companies do, proprietary and nonprofit.
Well, because that really is what triggers aging, is the misfolding of proteins throughout the body.
But also that's how you come up with novel medications. And what they do is they do all these different peptides or these protein designs, different folding structures.
A peptide is just a protein.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And then they test those out. Well, testing those out in humans or monkeys or rats would take forever. So they test them out virtually or in AI, and able to, kind of pilfer through millions and millions of options to pull out like 10 or something. I'm just simplifying it.
Yeah. Before AI, I remember 10, 15 years ago, Citizen Science released a thing like, as anyone can go in and play a game where you fold proteins, and they just kept building because the manpower needed. They're just like, well, we'll pass it out to everyone and then just take all that data. And then AI came out, and it's like, we can do, millions of these in a day or whatever now. So, but it was a really cool little like,
they had the gamers.
Science. So yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, you could go in and just fold proteins, and they just take that information, just keep stacking it with all the different people doing it, which was really cool.
So I think you're going to see more and more of this. And I think GLP-1s are, like in the news right now, but I think that's really evidence of the fact that these peptide-based kind of medications that are mimicking growth factors in the body are going to be used to treat so many different things. And hopefully Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, which is such an amazingly high incidence now, is going to be positively affected by these medications.
Yeah. And unlike some other things like we talked about, there's really nothing right now that there's no cure for these conditions.
No.
We don't even really know why they happen. And there's also really no drug therapy right now that is helpful.
No.
And not harmful.
Yep.
Yeah. Very interesting. That was a cool one. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of buzz on GLP-1 specifically, but I think really the more salient point here is that peptides are pretty fascinating and offer a lot more benefit than we maybe even realize. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do love the lymphatic system. I like bringing it up again. When you said favorite word about the brain, I'm like, oh gosh, like infinite? Like, I don't know.
I like to see if you're listening when I do these, because sometimes people drone off and you pause for a second. So I think I had to bring you back down to what I was saying.
I was not sure where, that's what I'm saying. I was not sure where
you were
telling
me you don't know lymphatic? I mean, I feel like every conversation I have with you, it's like lymphatic this, lymphatic that. I went and washed my car and then lymphatic this.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite word?
It's amazing. All right. Well, let's take a break and then we're going to come back and talk about my study.
I love it.
My research that I'm into.
Love it.
And we're back. It's my turn. All right. So my article was a very good one. As I talked about in 2024, I did a very in-depth course. It was a 6-week course, 6 or 8 weeks. Oh gosh, it was in the middle of summer. It was kind of bad timing, but it was all about gut health, like GI mapping. So since then, I obviously have been doing a ton of research. And one of the things that came out just in November of 2024 in Nature Microbiology was this study. Coffee consumption is associated with intestinal Lactobacter abundance and prevalence across multiple cohorts.
Is that good or bad? Just tell me right now.
It's good.
Oh, thank God.
So this is a specific...
Because I love coffee. I know. I was like, if coffee's bad, Nils, we're screwed.
So this was a really cool study because it's humans. They also did look at some primate data and some other things just to kind of cross-reference things. But it was done by the researchers at a company called Zoe, which is a British company that does GI mapping.
Nice.
So they have access to not only tons of their own data, but then they were also able, it says cohort, so they were able to bring in their own data and then bring in data from public access sites.
Do you remember they have that whole genetic and mapping system in England that people can gain access to? We talked about that before.
That's correct.
Probably the same one.
It is. And they also use worldwide data.
Yeah.
So let's first start off like, why coffee? Why would they look at coffee?
Because it's awesome.
Right. Well, because it's consumed around the world.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for, and this is what's really challenging, I talk about this a lot when I talk about nutritional research, it's really hard to pick. There is no perfect diet because it's based on so many factors, including where you live, what your gender is, who your parents were. Like there's so many factors that go into diet, and you can never do a double-blinded study because what would that even prove? Nothing.
You could, if it was twins controlled in a hospital setting with nothing else getting in.
Right. And that would still only give you an N of
2. Yeah.
1, really, because they're identical.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a good point.
It's really hard to study nutrition in a way that is broad reaching because we're going to find people from all over the world who consume the exact same thing. Enter coffee. It is consumed around the world. It has a consistent intake. So also like other foods, they might be seasonal, whereas people will drink coffee. It's ritual, right? You will have it every single day or not at all. There's not a lot of in between. People are either coffee drinkers or they're not.
When you meet non-coffee drinkers, you kind of feel like there's something wrong with their personality.
Right. Yeah, I agree. People don't drink coffee.
Like you don't drink coffee?
Right.
Like you don't drink tea? Like what do you do in the morning?
What are you doing?
They probably
with
sit
your
there
life?
and meditate. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
so it really, those are really key things. And also out of 150 foods that they kind of isolated, showing the highest correlation with the microbiome, coffee has the strongest food microbiome association, meaning it was the easiest to pinpoint exactly a person who is a coffee consumer based on their microbiome. And it's because of this Lactobacter bacteria. So it also has unique compounds that are rarely found in foods, making them easier to trace in the body. So the type of compounds that are in coffee are not found in foods that are not commonly consumed. There's like a specific type of berry that they bring up that's grown like in the, African rainforest or whatever that is very rarely consumed, but is becoming more popular. But this is why coffee becomes a perfect thing to study.
Because it's easily trackable.
Correct.
Yeah. In the stool samples.
in many things, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So the study design here, like I said, it's a multi-cohort study. So they had 22,000 in their own database, essentially. So 22,000 people. Yep. Well, and this is what they do. Like they study the gut microbiome. So they have a lot of data from their own studies.
Right.
It was US and UK participants, and then they integrated it with public data from 211 other sites, which meant that they had a broad population of around 54,000 from 25 different countries. They looked at human stool. So they looked at, the microbiome or the feces. They also did in vitro, so studying in a lab, seeing what would grow, and in plasma, so in blood as well. So this Acinetobacter, there was a dependent increase in blood levels of quinic acid. This one, I'm like, I don't even know. Triglycerine and caffeine, right? Plus other uncharacterized molecules among coffee drinkers compared with non-coffee drinkers. They also studied, so when they did these in vitros in the lab, they did regular coffee, decaf coffee, and they also did regular instant and decaf instant coffee. And the really fascinating thing is that they looked at the polyphenol breakdown of each of these, but also the fiber content and the solutes. So you don't really think about that, like, when you brew coffee, you're looking for that perfect ratio of bean water.
Yeah.
But there's solutes in it. So you're taking the beans and how you grind them, what the water temperature is, what the acidity of the water is.
Well, sister, I got a new coffee maker and I read all about this over Christmas.
But all of these things change what gets into the result.
There's terms they use like bloom and all these other things for coffee production, but exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How much temperature, the amount of coffee, the weight of the coffee that goes in that, the grind of the
surface
coffee.
area. Yep.
Yeah. In the way that like in a pour over or a coffee machine that percolates down, all that can change the chemical milieu of the coffee itself.
Correct.
Just the way it's brewed.
Yes.
So now you're making me wonder if this is really measurable, if every coffee made is different like a snowflake.
It is. And they, that's also where them using instant coffee was so fascinating, because you take instant coffee and they basically brew like extremely strong coffee and then freeze dry it. So the resulting coffee is much different in its makeup. There's less polyphenols, there's more fiber content. It's just, it makes it different. But they were all equally effective at showing these same results. So the decaf was as effective. Weird. So it's not the caffeine, which is what we've historically thought with a lot of the benefits of coffee. People tend to relate it to the caffeine content, but that was proven not to be true in this particular case. They also looked at westernized and non-westernized populations, which again, the microbiome between those types of people living in a rural environment, someone who is eating like completely off the land versus someone who's in an extremely urban environment, like those two gut makeups are going to be completely different. So the fact that this specific bacteria is present in extremely high amounts in both of those people shows, again, why it's so cool to look at coffee specifically because of this. It's extremely rarely found in infants, like almost completely not, because it's something that hasn't been inoculated into their gut yet. And in children, they were only able to find one primate population that had any of it in their bacteria or in their gut. And they also looked at like frozen samples, the freeze-dried poop from like, who knows when, Paleolithic times. Yep. You can isolate those things too.
How you doing?
The outcome of all of this research. So there were 115 species of bacteria that were directly linked to drinking coffee. The top 10 were also strongly correlated with decaf coffee. So that's why I said decaf is showing for these specific reasons to be as beneficial. The Acinetobacter bacteria, which was the one we're looking at specifically, was 6 to 8 times more abundant in coffee drinkers. They separated people in groups. So like people who consumed less than 1 cup a month, people who consumed 1 to 3 cups a day, and then people who consumed 3 cups or more. And they took out anybody who consumed like far on the outreaches just so it didn't mess up the research. There was not statistical difference between the people who drank 1 to 3 cups and the people who drank more than 3 cups in the amounts. I mean, it was there, but it was not statistically different.
So like those days when I do the bender, I'm not getting any health benefits from it.
Not for this specific bacteria.
Okay.
Perhaps for other things, as you will see in my wrap up, because there are some extremes with coffee. The chlorogenic acid is one of the main polyphenols in coffee. The gut bacteria feed on it. They produce a wide range of other compounds like quinic acid, which is the one that's really rarely found in any other food. So that's why it's really easy to trace these things in things like plasma, which is really cool.
So what is the ultimate benefit of that, like of having a higher incidence of these kind of bacteria in your microbiome?
Well, that's still something that's being researched, and I'll talk about that in my practical application. and then the limitations, truly. And this is directly from the researchers. They said the microbiome mechanisms underlying the metabolism of coffee are a step towards mapping the role of specific foods in the gut microbiome, and similar patterns of microorganism food interactions for the dietary elements should be sought with systematic epidemiology and metagenomic investigations. So basically what they're saying is we can isolate things from food. But what does that mean?
Right.
This is where we have to then figure out what this means.
Which is the confusing part of the microbiome, because it's so diverse, as you said, from place to place. So many disease processes are coming back to the microbiome itself in the gut.
Well, Socrates, all disease begins in the gut.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? That is so funny. It really, so many things now they're linking to the gut.
Well, it makes sense. It's the only way your body interacts with what's being put in.
Well, I mean, you have things on your skin, sunlight and things like that.
Those things, yes. That's why I said put in.
Yeah.
Not absorbed.
No, I understand. Yeah. Stuff that you can actually control what's going in. Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting.
You can't, you control your sunlight exposure.
Yeah, you can't really control what you breathe in sometimes either. But you're right. What you eat and ingest. That's such a good point. But then you could eat all the right things, and if your microbiome's not correct or imbalanced or problematic, it can still lead to disease processes and stuff like that. And I find this so fascinating. So,
well, that's the fallacy. What you said there, the right things. The right things for who?
Exactly.
Or for whom? Because this is where this is unique with coffee. The rest of the gut microbiome of these people or participants is vastly different. And perhaps, and it should be, there's not one microbiome that's perfect for everyone. Just like I said at the beginning, that's why there is not one diet that's perfect for everyone. Now, can you have dysbiosis in the gut? Absolutely. What does dysbiosis mean? It just means your bacteria are out of whack. So those things can absolutely happen.
The one condition you always talk about, SIBO.
SIBO. Yep. That's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but things like C. diff.
Yeah.
Those are also things that throw the bacteria way out of whack. So there are a lot of reasons. And they've also, going back to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, that is one of the kind of precursors that they're figuring out, like people who develop neurodegenerative conditions tend to struggle with gut health.
When one of the first presentations of Parkinson's is slow gastric emptying. They think that
which is ironic that GLP-1s might be beneficial, because what do?
Right. Yeah.
They slow gastric emptying.
It gets so complicated. But then one of the theories on why Parkinson's occurred is that something comes from the gut, and they found
vagus
something
nerve.
From a pathology standpoint goes up through the vagus nerves, goes into the brain, and it transmits that way. So, and that's one of the few things that goes through the blood-brain barrier is that vagus nerve. Obviously, goes right into the brain.
Correct.
This is fascinating. Yeah. So what was their, in them studying this, obviously that they do, this is what their company does, but
that's all they do.
I understand. So what was their kind of, for looking at this, what was their overall goal in finding out? Is this to find out that you can see changes in the microbiome for food products that are ingested? It wasn't just about coffee. It was just about okay, we know everyone drinks coffee. We know that everyone has a microbiome. Let's just see if we can find some signature changes in the microbiome for coffee drinkers versus placebo or versus baseline.
Right, versus non-coffee drinkers. Yeah. Yes, that is correct. And then also because there are a lot of health benefits of coffee that people have for many years tried to figure out. And so
now they know at least somewhat what changes happen in the microbiome, so they can study it from there, seeing does that lead to the health benefits of coffee? Potentially.
And there are a lot of health benefits of coffee. And I would like to talk about those right now. There's I have 15 listed. So what are the health benefits of coffee? This to me is the practical application. So if you are not a coffee drinker, do I think you should start drinking coffee? No.
Yeah, I think you should.
It doesn't mean that you're not healthy. However, if you are a coffee drinker, here are some things that might make you feel better about your coffee habits. So the first one, as we've seen, it is now proven that coffee drinkers have improved microbiome diversity. They have a different type of bacteria that non-coffee drinkers do not possess. Coffee drinkers tend to have a more diverse microbiome, and that is shown in any type of study on the microbiome. The more diverse it is, the healthier it generally is. You don't want overgrowth of one specific type of bacteria. Even commensal bacteria, which are the good ones, if they're out of whack and growing unmitigated, this is like the whole... oh my gosh, what was that game we'd play when we were kids where you were either a deer, a food source, or water, right? And you'd run across and basically you're depleting your resources.
Where did you grow up? Game of Thrones? What are you talking about?
That sounds like a Colorado Mountains
game. In the woods. Yes, it was.
You get a bow. Yeah. I get a sword.
Yeah, we're going to run across the field and kill each other.
And then we'll just figure out who lives.
Yeah.
It's like Maze Runner. What was the one we always talk about?
Running Man?
No, the one with Jennifer Lawrence, the movie.
Oh, I don't know.
Hunger Games.
The Hunger Games.
Oh, so I've never seen that. I always think of Running Man.
How have you never seen Hunger Games?
Nope. It's because you have children. Why would you have watched it without your kids?
Yeah, it was
very good point.
Yeah.
Late for me too, but Running Man.
Right? Oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
They're rebooting that.
Yeah, Edgar Wright, one of my favorite directors. Yep.
It's going to be really good.
But you don't want your gut to become that way, even if it's overrun with good guys. It needs to be diverse. So coffee actually can improve cognitive function. It also may slow cognitive decline, meaning better memory, improved attention. These things are, yet to be proven, but these are all things that are studied. Reduces your risk of gallstones. This, though, was 6 cups a day was a 23% reduced risk. Most people are not probably consuming 6 cups a day. It should be noted, though, that if you have an active gallstone issue, you should not consume caffeine because the stimulatory effect can actually irritate your gallstones. So,
and I think that the benefit is the cholelithiasis, or the slowing of the, release of the bile salts and bile acids or whatever. So that stimulates it, so you don't get the precipitating kind of stone formation.
Right.
For people that have stones, you may stimulate that.
The stones.
It would lead to a lot of pain and probably surgery itself.
Yeah. Decreases cancer risk. There are 2 specific compounds, the Kwal and Cafsol, this is in lab studies, stop the growth of prostate and kidney cancer cells in the lab.
Love that.
So that obviously needs a lot more research. It helps repair damaged cells. Why is that? Because coffee is extremely high in polyphenols, as we talked about, but also antioxidants. So these are things that help your cells repair themselves. They're also very high in things like fruit, but again, you may not always have access to fresh fruit. So coffee has a great way to get your polyphenols and antioxidants in without, and especially in areas where there just might not be a lot of fresh fruit. These are very beneficial.
There we go.
Lowers your risk of Parkinson's disease.
Yeah. How many cups?
5 or more cups a day reduces the risk.
We're going to have to increase it, Nils.
And may slow the progression of disease.
Yeah.
And this is where things like Parkinson's I find just so fascinating. Both of our studies brought that up, and we really don't know why it works in these areas, but does show promise. Mm-hmm. Coffee also protects against diabetes. There's a 6% drop per cup consumed. So that's pretty cool. If you drink 4 or more cups a day, you have less risk than those who are drinking 2 or fewer cups a day.
So interesting.
Yeah. But this, they can actually see per cup a 6% drop in your risk of developing diabetes.
It decreases your stroke risk
by
21%. Now,
you're jumping way ahead.
No, but coffee and atrial fibrillation is not recommended. So
caffeine. It's not coffee.
Oh, you can have decaf.
Right. And in the study, we proved that the benefits of decaf are as strong.
No joke.
Yes. So that's
so interesting, because
dependent.
They tend to tell patients don't drink coffee.
Caffeine.
Yeah, but they don't tell them you can have non-caffeinated coffee.
And still get the gut benefits.
Wow.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Improves bowel regularity. They say 1/3 of coffee drinkers report needing to use the restroom to have bowel movement within 30 minutes of having their cup of coffee.
Let's go.
And that is the same for decaf.
Nils raised his hand.
That is not, they used to think it was just the caffeine, but when you do studies, that is the same result with decaf. And that is more proof about the benefits for the gut. It increases your physical activity. So they did a study on middle-aged women. They were 17% more likely to reach their physical activity goals if they drank 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day.
A little stimulation.
Yep. Which also then, we talked about stroke risk, helps maintain weight. So the possible link to caffeine's effect on metabolic activity, but it's also an appetite suppressant. So you see all, over-the-counter diet drugs all have caffeine because it makes you more active. It reduces your appetite. The stroke risk was interesting because it was as little as a half a cup.
Which is crazy.
So 1/2 to 3 cups a day had a 21% lower risk of stroke.
Wow.
Yeah. Very fascinating.
So fascinating.
Has liver protective benefits. This was in 3 to 4 cups a day, reduced the risk of all types of chronic liver disease and hepatocellular carcinomas, which are the most common type of liver cancer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we're talking things like...
Actually, I think metastatic colon disease is probably more common in the liver, but that's...
Well, this is
primary liver cancer, hepatos. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. It decreases inflammatory markers. So this might help reduce overall inflammation. More work is really needed here to understand why. There's no idea why.
Yeah.
People who drink coffee would have less inflammatory markers. Decreased risk of heart disease.
What?
Drinking 3 to 5 cups a day had a 15% reduction in cardiovascular disease versus no coffee.
That's nuts.
Mm-hmm. But maybe this is also, you have to look up the chain. I put this down here because physical activity and maintaining a healthy weight. Mm-hmm. What are things you can do to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease? be active, don't be overweight. So, this is where the cause and effect with nutrition becomes such a cycle.
Yeah, it's hard to ferret out what's actually going on.
Right, which thing are you isolating?
Chicken or egg. Yeah.
Yes, and then also may lower your risk of depression. This was only an observational. They've never actually studied this. They're just looking at observational data with at least 4 cups a day. And they say that it could just be that people who are not depressed are more likely to drink coffee versus the coffee actually reducing your risk of depression.
Completely.
Which makes sense. Right, you're up, you're moving around, you're drinking coffee. But it also does make sense that the caffeine is a neurostimulant and might make you feel better.
I feel like coffee, of all the things that's in the news in terms of things we ingest, everything gets demonized. Mm-hmm. Carbohydrates were terrible in the 90s, and then fat was bad, and then blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. Protein was bad for a while. We can't have protein. Salt's bad, salt's good, that kind of thing. I feel like coffee has always had kind of a good PR agent. There's always an article that comes out every couple of years like, coffee can help with cancer. Coffee can help with this or that. But I didn't realize it was this many benefits. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, and these are just the things that have research behind them.
Yeah.
With the exception of the depression. I mean, there's still research, but it's observational research or observational data. So I think what this really shows, though, is that it was so cool that they were able to think of something, right? Thinking outside the box. Like, wow, we have tons of data. Mm-hmm. But what one thing would be across the board that wouldn't be affected by income, food availability, where you live in the world? What would be something that we could find? And I just find it fascinating that they went to coffee and that coffee is something that has so many other benefits.
Exactly. Yeah. There's probably not many other products you ingest that would be universally consumed more than coffee, maybe water and a few other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe chicken or something. I don't know.
Well, even water. I mean, my cousin who's actually in Honduras right now, like they drink more coffee than they do water because it's just readily available.
Yeah, and also, especially the water source, if you boil it.
That's exactly. Like they all have to kind of store their water for long periods of time and everything. It blows me away. So when they go to the grocery store, they stop at every other person's porch to say hi and have a cup of coffee. So they have like 10 cups of coffee on the way to the grocery store. So,
I got to move to Honduras, man.
He loves it. It's a lot of neighborhood.
They're little countries. They got it going on.
Yeah. So even very low socioeconomic, they all drink coffee. Like it's one of those perfect things.
So let's ask this question from the study. So they used a specific brewing method to brew the coffee. What do you think that brewing method was?
So say that again. So they did one type of brewing method.
Correct. For the in vitro studies. I would
love to say it's like pour over, perfectly done, like we would get at our fancy coffee shops, but I'm assuming it's not. Maybe instant?
No. Well, remember they did instant decaf and instant regular. So instant was just mixed with hot water. Yeah. But for the actual brewed coffee, they used a mocha pot.
Oh, yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, which is just, it's a kind of a steam forced percolator for people who don't know. But a mocha pot brews a very strong cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that was kind of what they distilled down as being the most common, like across the world.
Yeah.
Because all it takes is heat.
YouTube, the way the algorithm works, there may be some coffee aficionado that ends up on this episode and it's going to be like, I hate these people because they're such snobs when it comes to coffee, when it gets at a high level.
Interestingly enough, there's a podcast that was done before this research came out with a coffee expert where they were kind of talking about it before it was actually published. Right. So with the researcher, but also with a coffee expert. I'll link that. Nils, I'll send that link to you so you can put that link in the description below.
Yeah, hearing a coffee expert, I find fascinating, but it's like listening to a sommelier about wine. At some point, you fall asleep. You're like, this is insane.
It's really cool. So in the podcast, they actually talk about the polyphenol content, the fiber content of each of the different ways of brewing and each of the types of coffee. They also, the one guy on the podcast doesn't drink coffee anymore, but he's started brewing his own kombucha coffee. So kombucha, uses fermented tea. Like you have the SCOBY, which is just the symbiotic, bacterial organism thing. Well, he found a way to actually do kombucha coffee, and they actually were able to test the polyphenol content of the kombucha coffee because there's also polyphenols in tea. Tea is another extremely high source of polyphenols and of antioxidants. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talk about green tea all the time.
That's why I drink green tea every day.
Super high
lowers
antioxidants.
your breast cancer risk.
ECEG. I mean, it's real. So, I think the cool thing about this research to me, like I said, is just the fact that they found this way to do it, that they picked a substance that had this amazing broad-reaching effect on multiple types of populations across the globe.
Yeah.
And that there's benefit. real benefit.
And I have to say, it's like some of the best parts of my day.
Oh, I agree.
Is waking up and have a nice cup of coffee. I sit there with my 2 dogs, Yeti and Bear, and I stare at them. And I'm like, what kind of menacing behaviors are you going to do today? I know.
Kind of chaos you can have today.
I absolutely love coffee. I love having coffee with my wife. It's probably literally the best time of my day.
This is the ritual. And like Nils was saying with Honduras, I mean, there is so much ritual built around this substance. We need to do that in America.
Like I like my neighbors. They're fine. I need to walk to places and just go over to their house and have a cup of coffee. We never do that in America. Do you know? We're all siloed.
But we used to.
I know we used to.
Yeah.
I know. It's sad. I mean, that community part of it. That's another thing I like about coffee is you go to a coffee shop. I'm not really talking to anyone, but everyone's there having a cup of coffee, sitting around, lounging, maybe working, doing creative stuff, listening to music. I love that too.
Right.
It's
just brings people together.
It is a great food. I consider it a food. All right.
Yeah, it is.
I love it, Amy. This is like the best one you presented yet.
I thought about bringing in I was going to bring in, because I have some instant coffee at home and I have decaf and I have regular beans. I'm like, I should bring in all my coffees. I'm like, no, like, don't be a weirdo. Like, I have so many different types of coffee at home because I do. Like, I have different types of coffee I drink in the morning. I have tons of, you guys have seen me episode here, stuff we're into from last year, where I brew coffee on the podcast. I am a huge coffee connoisseur.
Yeah.
So this was my nutrition bias coming out too, because I do believe in the benefits of coffee.
Do you drink instant coffee? Like,
I do sometimes.
Okay. Growing up, like my parents always drank instant coffee when we camp and stuff like that. But I don't know anyone today who actually like does the Folgers crystals or whatever. Like that was.
Well, I use the Nescafe Gold.
Okay. Well, like when we were kids, like every other commercial was, Folgers in your cup, right? Like it was such a big ad campaign. And now, like, I don't know anyone who drinks instant coffee.
So I drink it sometimes and it brings back such nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. Now, I like really good coffee. I'll order specialty coffee. Amy's kind of the same, up to a price tolerance, because some of that stuff can be kind of expensive.
Kind of.
And then grind it and then do everything correctly and stuff. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but it brings back such a nostalgia to me.
Yeah. And I actually, there are times I use it in like baking, so I always have instant coffee on hand. I'll put it in my protein shakes. If I'm like running late in the morning, I'm like, oh man, I just need a little kick. Like you put a little scoop of instant coffee in there. Or like if I am making Dalgona coffee. That's where I'll use instant coffee, where you whip it. Mm-hmm. So good. So there are definitely times where I will use it almost to like boost something, or if you're making a mole sauce, doing instant coffee. Yeah. Like, so I always have instant.
I used to visit my friends, them, and they only had instant coffee in the house because they weren't coffee drinkers.
So they kept instant. Yeah.
And I kind of liked it. I'd wake up in the morning because I wake up before everyone, and I go there and I get she'd leave the instant coffee out for me, and I'd mix it together. Yep. It was very nice.
Yeah.
So one question before we go. Cold brew, does it have the same effects as something that's brewed
absolutely
hot?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you know from reading the manual that came with your fancy coffee maker, it's about the extraction process.
Yep.
So cold brew, there might be a very long,
takes longer
exposure time.
Yep.
So your exposure is going to change the solutes, the water temperature. So if you're having a cold water or a cool water, obviously you need that longer exposure time. Also, your grind is going to be coarser.
Yeah.
So there's there's less surface area because of the long exposure.
Yeah, you do have a finer grind.
Yeah, versus an espresso where you have an extremely fine grind and a very short exposure.
Yeah.
And you're using pressure and steam.
Right. And the differences in the taste in those are pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, that's why cold brew tends to be very mild.
So the coffee maker I got, it's not crazy expensive, but it's not cheap. It's called Fellow, Fellow. They have these pour over systems that are way too expensive. But the coffee maker,
you say on the episode where I brew coffee that it's really not expensive.
That one is. It's expensive.
And I said, yes, they are. I'm like,
this
Fellow
coffee
is
maker
crazy
is actually
expensive.
pretty reasonable in comparison to some of the more expensive ones.
But the pour over from them is pricey.
It's very pricey
compared to my $20 or $30 AeroPress.
So you can you put in what you want to do, and then it'll tell you the weight of the coffee, the temperature that you're going to brew it through, the timing. Everything's controlled. The cool thing is they have brew cycles that they download every week on your app, and then you can adjust with a different type of coffee and brew it to their brew cycle settings, and it goes right into the maker itself. And I find that really fascinating because I'm not like Amy. I'm not going to sit there and delve too far into it. But the fact that you have people that are super nerds with coffee, and you can take their brew cycle settings, and then you can use it. Yeah. And then it makes you feel
why
really
wouldn't
special.
you? Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Recipe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's like that's home chef. That's home coffee.
yeah,
You're
They
taking.
need it.
Why wouldn't you let the experts pick your brew time?
they should do more of that. Like I found that really fascinating with this coffee maker. You imagine you had a stove that was connected, right? And somehow it had different settings. And they would tell you how much to put in the pot, and you put it in there, and then like
They make those. They have those little ovens that do that.
I want my kitchen robot that you like.
exactly,
You know
it's
what
kind
I
of
mean?
was. You would just press a button, and you would put that,
Yes.
some famous chef's version of it in there.
Yes, I
And
want that chef's scallops.
Yeah.
Put it in my robot. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm waiting
I don't know
for.
if it's gonna be that good. But. All right.
See, that sounds terrible to me because I like to cook. I want no robot in my kitchen. All right. Well, so that wraps up Research We're Into 8.0, or more
times 8.
more research we're into.
Yes.
Yep. Next time it'll be a pie episode. It'll be 9.
Yeah, and we'll be past
Yeah, to the
200
9.
episodes, and we're gonna have on our 200th episode. I think I'm gonna wear a tuxedo. I've decided.
Yeah, we talked about that on our 100th episode where I got to wear a crown.
Yes.
All right. So if you've made it this far in the episode, thank you all so much for being here. Please share us with a friend. If you did listen to this episode all the way through, thank you very much. We do really appreciate it. Please listen longer than the 20 minutes that Dr. Martin says he listens to. You can find all of our social media handles.
That's more than I listen to
here.
anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can also leave me a voicemail at 303-630-9038. You can also text that number, or all of my contact information is in the description box below. Until next time.
See you there.